Welcome back, folks. Today, we're diving into some of the most memorable moments when presidents just couldn't keep their cool. Because let's face it, being the leader of the free world seems like a pretty stressful gig. So it's understandable that even the most composed commander-in-chief might occasionally lose their cool. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson, or LBJ, as he was not so affectionately known, was a man who didn't mince words. In fact, he practically weaponized them. This was a man who once famously said, and I quote, "Sometimes you just have to piss in the sink." He was brash, he was bold, and he didn't give a damn about what you thought about his sink-pissing habits. One particularly memorable example of LBJ's direct communication style came during a press conference in 1964. The Vietnam War is escalating, the Civil Rights Act has just been passed, and LBJ is dealing with a whole heap of pressure. So, naturally, when a reporter asked him about his choice of attire, LBJ completely loses it. He unleashes a torrent of profanity, accusing the reporter of being more interested in his clothes than in the fate of the free world. The whole thing was caught on camera, and it instantly became the stuff of legend. Richard Nixon, the man who brought us the greatest hits of the 1970s like Watergate, was not exactly known for his calm demeanor. The man seemed to exist in a perpetual state of barely contained rage, and nowhere was this more evident than in his interactions with the press. Nixon hated the press. He saw them as the enemy, a bunch of liberal elites determined to bring him down. So when Nixon finally had to face the music during the Watergate scandal, it didn't go well. He stammered, he sweated, he practically vibrated with indignation. He denied everything, but his denials were about as convincing as a $3 bill. The more he protested, the guiltier he looked. The press replayed Nixon's sweaty, sputtering performance on loop, turning him into a national punchline. Bill Clinton, the man who could charm a pantsuit off a politician, also had a knack for getting himself into some rather compromising positions. And I'm not just talking about his questionable taste in saxophone solos. No, I'm talking about the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal, a political sex scandal that rocked the nation. When confronted with allegations of an affair, Clinton famously wagged his finger at the camera and declared, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." Of course, as we all know now, that was a lie, a big, fat presidential lie. And the more Clinton denied it, the more the public doubted him. It was like watching a magician try to convince you he hadn't just pulled a rabbit out of a hat while holding the rabbit. The scandal provided endless fodder for late-night comedians. George W. Bush, the man who once looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes and saw his soul, also had a rather unfortunate encounter with a pair of shoes. So there Bush was, minding his own business, giving a press conference in Iraq, when suddenly a journalist decided to express his displeasure by launching his shoes at the president's head. To Bush's credit, he dodged those shoes like a pro. He ducked, he weaved, he practically contorted himself into a pretzel to avoid getting a size 10 to the face. And then, after narrowly avoiding a shoe-related concussion, Bush just kind of shrugged it off. He chuckled, he made a joke about the shoe size, and then he just carried on with his speech as if nothing had happened. It was a bizarre moment, but Bush handled it with surprising grace. The incident became an iconic image of his presidency. Barack Obama, the cool, calm and collected president who brought us hope and change, also had a few moments where his cool facade cracked. Being president is stressful, especially when you're dealing with a massive oil spill that's threatening to destroy the entire Gulf Coast. Obama, being the eloquent orator that he is, didn't exactly resort to shouting or cursing, but you could see the frustration etched on his face, the way his jaw clenched, the way his voice tightened ever so slightly. He visited the Gulf Coast, met with the families affected by the spill, and gave speeches promising to hold BP accountable. But the oil just kept gushing day after day, turning the ocean into a toxic soup. Behind that calm exterior, Obama was absolutely fuming. Donald Trump, the man who needs no introduction, is a man who thrives on conflict. So it's no surprise that his presidency was a 4-year-long exercise in pushing buttons and crossing lines. He insulted allies, praised dictators, retweeted conspiracy theories, and spent an inordinate amount of time watching cable news and getting angry about what people were saying about him. And when it came to the press, Trump's relationship with the media was about as harmonious as a pack of rabid badgers fighting over a half-eaten burrito. He called them the enemy of the people, accused them of fake news, and regularly launched into Twitter tirades against any journalist who dared to criticize him. He stormed out of press conferences and refused to answer questions. Harry S. Truman, the man who gave the order to drop the atomic bomb, was not a man to be trifled with. He was tough, decisive, and had a temper that could curdle milk. But beneath that gruff exterior, Truman was also a devoted family man, and he had a particularly soft spot for his daughter, Margaret. Margaret Truman was a talented woman, but her singing voice was, shall we say, an acquired taste. One unimpressed individual was a music critic for the Washington Post, who wrote a scathing review of Margaret's performance. Truman didn't take too kindly to someone insulting his little girl's singing. He penned a letter to the critic full of righteous anger and colourful language. He called the critic a frustrated old man and even threatened to punch him in the nose. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, was a man who lived by a simple code, honor, duty, and a willingness to shoot anyone who looked at him funny. Jackson was a notorious hothead, and he had a well-documented history of getting into duels. In fact, he was involved in over 100 duels in his lifetime, but perhaps the most famous duel involving Andrew Jackson was his showdown with Charles Dickinson, a man who had made the mistake of insulting Jackson's wife, Rachel. Dickinson had accused Rachel of being a bigamist, a charge that sent Jackson into a rage. He challenged Dickinson to a duel, and the two men met on the morning of May 30th, 1806, in a field near Adairville, Kentucky. Dickinson fired first, hitting Jackson in the chest. But Jackson, being the badass that he was, didn't even flinch and mortally wounded Dickinson. Theodore Roosevelt, the man who gave us the teddy bear and the Panama Canal, was a force of nature. He was loud, boisterous, and had a temper that could rival a grizzly bear. Roosevelt was a man of action, and he had little patience for those he deemed weak or cowardly. So, when a newspaper editor accused him of being a coward during the 1912 presidential election, Roosevelt was understandably furious. The editor had claimed that Roosevelt was afraid to debate his opponents. He immediately challenged the editor to a duel, but the editor, wisely, declined. Not content to let the insult stand, Roosevelt stormed into the editor's office, grabbed him by the collar, and threatened to skin him alive if he ever called him a coward again. The editor quickly retracted his statement and apologized profusely. John F. Kennedy, the epitome of cool, calm, and collected, also had his moments of frustration. But unlike some of his predecessors, Kennedy's anger rarely manifested itself in outbursts or tantrums. Instead, it came out in the form of cutting wit and sarcasm. One such instance occurred during a press conference in 1961, shortly after the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. The invasion, intended to overthrow Fidel Castro's communist regime in Cuba, had been a complete and utter failure. During the press conference, a reporter asked Kennedy if he had any regrets about the invasion. Kennedy, his face betraying no emotion, simply replied, "Yes, I have one regret. I regret that the Bay of Pigs didn't happen on the previous administration's watch." The reporters in the room gasped. It was a brutal yet undeniably witty retort, encapsulating Kennedy's frustration with the situation. And there you have it. Even the most powerful people in the world have their breaking points. Which moment surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating insights into history.